So, gentlemen, welcome to a new video, and here we will be talking about flexible object configuration in JavaScript. Before we begin, as usual, I want to remind you that subscribing to this channel, liking this video, and leaving comments help promote this kind of content. Also, add me as a friend on VK, and in the description of this video, there is a link to Patreon where you can support the creation of similar content. Well, now let's get to work with objects and figure out what they actually are, what we can do with them, how getters and setters work, and generally talk about the depth of JavaScript when working with objects. And right away, as an example, I will create a person object, but I will not create it as we usually do. When we create objects, that is, by assigning some fields, I will create an object differently using the global object class, N. This class has a method called create. In principle, the record looks logical because we call the create method on the object, which allows us to create a new object. The create method takes two parameters, and both of them are objects. For now, we won't talk about the first object, because it is actually the prototype for this object. We will talk about the second parameter, where we can specify certain fields for this object. And let's think about what fields a person object might have. Let's say I introduce a field name here, and there is already a slight difference from the usual notation we are familiar with. That is, we are not creating, for example, name equals owner here. We are creating a field differently. It is an object. And to set the value for this key, we use the key value, and here we pass the name we want to set. For example, the person will be named Vladilin. Let's immediately log this person to the console and see what it looks like if we refresh the page. And, basically, this is expected. We get an object in a console that has a name field with the value of Vladilin. Now let's add another field besides name, for example, birth year, which will be the birth year of this person, and its value will be, for example, 1993. Now, if I save and refresh the page, as expected, we get the values we need. But now, if we expand this object, we will see some features. I am expanding it. And now you can see that these keys are highlighted in a pale color. That is, if we were creating a regular object, they would be filled with color without opacity. What does this mean? This means that these fields are present in the object, but if we, for example, iterate over the keys of this object, these fields will not be included in the loop. Let me show you what this means. In JavaScript, we can use the for loop a bit differently. For example, in each iteration, we will create a variable key. Then, using the in operator, we can specify which object we need to iterate over. That is, for example, with the person object, and let's log its key values to the console. That is, I will write a line to identify the key and will output the value of the key. If I nullify the page, we won't get anything, even though the person object actually has these two fields. For comparison, if I temporarily comment out this person object and create a new person object with the field name, let's say, birth year 1993. If I save it like this and refresh the page, then, as you can see, here we get the value of the key, meaning JavaScript sees that there is a name field and a birth year field. But I showed this as an example. Let's return to the object creator. To restore the default behavior of these keys in this object, we can configure these fields. That is, in this case, name and birth year are just different fields, so they have different settings. And here we can pass various parameters that are property descriptors. Visual Studio is helping me understand what that is. For example, to make the name field visible in a for loop, we can use a parameter called enumerable. By default, when we create an object using Object.create, it is set to false. But if we pass the value true here, and I refresh the page now, as you can see, we get the key name here. By the way, we can immediately refer to the value, for example, person key. Thus, in addition to the key name itself, we will also get its value. That is, as you can see, here we get the value. At the same time, birth year is not displayed because both it and numerable have a value of false. We can specify this explicitly, but by default, it has that value. This is the first point. Second point, let me show you how it works. Suppose I access the person object, its name field, and set it to, for example, Maxim. I'll just reassign the value. And, essentially, we now expect to get the values key name and Maxim in the console because we explicitly set them. But if I refresh the page, we still get Vladen here. Moreover, if I refer to person in the console and, let's say, try to change birth year to 2000, it seems like we get some result. But if we refer to person again, we still get the old value, the year 1993. The thing is, there is another property descriptor that tells JavaScript that this object cannot be modified, or more precisely, its specific fields. And the descriptor is called writable. By default, it is set to false. But if we pass the value true here and save everything in this form, then I remind you that we change the name further, and if I refresh the page, the name field Maxim changes. At the same time, if I change birth year, it will still remain at the old value because the writable parameter for birth year is set to false by default. There is also another descriptor that allows manipulating the keys of this object, and it is called configurable. By default, it is also set to false, but let's set it to true for the name field. Well, accordingly, for birth year, I will just explicitly state that it is set to false. This parameter indicates that we can delete any key from the object. So, for example, if I just reload the page, access the person object and, let's say, I want to delete the name field from it. For this, I can use the delete operator. Then, I specify the key of the object that I want to delete. I press enter, and now, if I refer to person, it only has the birth year field. However, if I try to delete the birth year field, so as you can see, we get false here, and then if I enter person, it has birth year, which means the configurable parameter is responsible for this. And if we set it to false, then we won't be able to delete this value from the object in any way. This specifically concerns property descriptors. Now let's talk about getters and setters, and let's analyze the following task. The person object has a birth year field, which is the year they were born, but it is more convenient to show their age. For this, we can use the age field, which we also set. But how do we simply calculate the age of this person based on their birth year? For this, we can use a getter and setter. In this configuration object, we implement two methods, getter and setter, and then we can perform certain manipulations here. The rule of a getter is that we need to return some new value here. For example, I can return hello here. So, for now, I'll show some temporary string. Let me also comment out. Reassign the value of name and refresh the page. And now if I refer to person and then refer to the age field, and note that this is not a function, it's just a specific field, then as a result I get the value hello here. So, it's as if we implemented a function here, but in reality, this field works like a regular field in an object. And this is great because in these functions we can execute any logic we want. For example, to calculate the age, we can refer to new date, call the getFullYear method, and subtract this birth year. And if we save now and access person.age, we will get the value 26 here. Yes. Although we don't actually have a fixed value of 26 anywhere, we do perform certain calculations. The same applies to the set method. In the set method, we accept a certain value. Let's say I can output it to the console for now. For example, set age, I pass some value here, and let's see how it works. Refreshing the page, suppose personage is equal to 100. I press enter, and as you can see, here we get the console log set age 100. Although in reality, if we refer to personage again, it will still be 26 because we are not reassigning any value. And in these setters, we can essentially do anything. For example, we can change the background of the entire window. For instance, the window base. For example, like this. And now, if I refer to personage and assign it a new value, for instance, some value, it doesn't really matter what. We will get an error because we need to refer to the document here, not the window object. Let's repeat the manipulation. As you can see, we were just assigning a new value to the object. But at the same time, we changed the background. In fact, a large number of frameworks are built on these getters and setters to monitor changes in certain fields and execute additional logic, such as rendering the application. And now let's quickly talk about the first parameter that we pass to the Object.create function. In this object, we can specify the prototype of the newly created person object. That is, for example, here we can create some method, say calculateAge. This is a function that will not take any arguments, and let's say it will simply output the age of this person to the console. For example, we will repeat this logic. Here, I will write age. And here we can also refer to the context of this, meaning the current object. Yes, if we refresh the page, then in foreign we get console log of this method, because in reality, the foreign loop also iterates over the prototype of this object. We will talk about this now. But now, if I refer to the person object and call the calculateAge method on it, as you can see, we get the expected result. Now, a few words about the foreign loop. As you have seen, in addition to getting certain keys, such as the name field, which we said is enumerable, we also get the value of the function that is in the prototype. That is, if we look at the person object, there is no calculateAge method at the top level, but it is present in the prototype. Moreover, it is highlighted in such a way that it shows up in the foreign loop, so to avoid iterating over the prototype and only iterate over the object's own keys, we can add a check. If we have an object person, and we actually called a method called hasOwnProperty on the key, then only in that specific case will we indeed do console log of that key. If we save now, at this stage we only get the name field. This method allows us not to iterate over the prototype, and it is recommended to always use this method when you are iterating with an array using the foreign loop. I hope it is now a bit clearer how you can work with getters and setters, because essentially, they provide unlimited possibilities for writing reactive and dynamic functionality when you create such constructs. I also hope that you now understand these fields and are already thinking about applying them in your real projects. But for now, I will say goodbye and see you in other videos.